Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife was having fun at the office where she worked, but with whom? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Betty Sutton looked nervously around the bar. Although she had done this many times before, she was always worried that she would meet someone familiar. The chances of this were slim since she chose the meeting place half an hour away from her area, but it didn't hurt to be careful. Only fools don't watch out, she thought, but that's why fools get caught. Betty didn't want to meet people she knew. The chances of them mentioning to her husband where they saw her were something she didn't want to risk. Her husband, Travis, was busy helping someone at work with a problem tonight, so this was the perfect opportunity for Betty. It wasn't that she needed many opportunities or that they were difficult to find. She usually scheduled her dates during daytime hours when Travis was at work. But the opportunity for a rare late-night encounter was too good to pass up. Betty loved Travis with all her heart and would never do anything to jeopardize their marriage. She intended to grow old with Travis and spend their golden years traveling and visiting their grandchildren once they arrived. Losing Travis simply wasn't in her plans. Betty and Travis had been married for 20 years. She knew everything about him. She was sure that she knew her husband better than he knew himself, but the fact was that they were stuck in a rut. Travis hadn't seen it yet, but it was there. Betty was smart enough to understand that every marriage goes through ups and downs. Betty knew that her best friend's marriage had broken down for this very reason. Her aunt and uncle divorced for the same reason after years of being together. Things get a little stagnant. As an above-average woman, Betty understood that modern marriage was very different from what our ancestors experienced. There was no longer a need to fight for survival or to work very hard to feed oneself. In the modern era, people are living much longer and are much more isolated from their peers than ever before. In the old days, people lived on plots of land and could be separated from their neighbors by relatively large distances. Even then, although they did not live very close to each other, everyone gathered together regularly at churches or other social events. In the modern era, people live much closer to each other, but in many cases, they do not even know the names of their neighbors, let alone communicate with them. There are people who live next to each other for years and never speak to each other. The modern era has also brought with it a degree of flexibility and morality. Betty loved Travis and didn't want their marriage to end, so she didn't see anything wrong with casual affairs. In her opinion, this only added urgency to her relationship with her husband. This did not threaten their marriage in any way. She even had clearly defined rules for what she did and how she did it. The first rule was that there were no repeat visits. She only met once. Thus, there was no danger of emotional attachments. It was only night. All her emotional feelings were intended only for her husband. The second rule was that any intimacy she had was never something she wouldn't do or hadn't already done with Travis. Travis gave her more than just a night. He made love to her. So, there was no chance that she would ever replace him or hold him back if she wanted to try something new intimacy. It had to be with someone she trusted who wouldn't hurt her. That meant it had to be Travis. The third rule was that nothing she ever did could take the place of spending time with Travis. Her marriage was the most important thing in her life. It was superior to everything else. So, if she was planning to do something or go out with someone and Travis suddenly came home, Travis won. She just didn't go. If she was meeting someone and Travis called, she would return home immediately, even if it was necessary to do so halfway. Travis came first. The final rule was that she never, ever did anything at home. There was no way that she could disrespect her husband by doing anything in his home. Betty wasn't going to do this forever either. This was only a temporary phenomenon. Travis tried hard to get a promotion that would increase their security and reduce his workload. With a reduced workload, they would have more time to devote to each other. Then, she would start doing things to bring the spark back into the bedroom. But to put the blame on Travis now, when he worked so hard for both of them, wouldn't be fair. So, being a modern woman in a modern marriage, Betty simply outsourced some of Travis's responsibilities. It's not that Travis is incapable, he was simply under enormous stress. He almost never had time to relax, but when they found time to unwind, it was wonderful. Betty thought back to just 4 months ago when they went to Hawaii. It was the best time of her life. She also noticed that many women were paying a lot of attention to her husband, but as usual, this big fool only noticed her. Betty used Craigslist to meet people. She never used her real name and never posted an ad herself. She only responded to advertisements posted by others. This left no records that anyone could ever find. Betty never responded to advertisements posted by men looking for casual, intimate, or quick hookups. She knew that such men were predators. She only responded to advertisements from men who were looking for long-term relationships, although she was not interested in them for more than a quick fling. It seemed mean to them, but they could always refuse. None of them ever refused. Betty also never searched for men on her home computer. She went to the library and used one of their free public computers. She created a different email address and never accessed that account at home or on her cell phone. She covered all her bases but was still nervous. You can't be too careful. Trav, what if she doesn't love me? Gary Lynch asked for the third time. Gary, you're a great guy. You just need to get out and meet someone, Travis replied. I'm sure she'll love you. After all, she agreed to meet you, and you sent her a photo of yourself. If she didn't like you, she wouldn't agree to meet you. Travis shook his head again. The idiosyncrasies and quirks of dating in the modern era puzzled him. Travis was an old-school man. He was glad that he didn't have to deal with all the problems that Gary went through. He met his wife Betty in college, and they had been together ever since. They raised 2 children who were now also in college. Let modern kids deal with modern problems. Travis was still madly in love with Betty. Of course, she was no longer a young woman. Her figure had widened a little, and her breasts sagged a little, but these things only endeared her to him more. He remembered sitting on their bed while she stood in front of the mirror and discovered the first wrinkles around her eyes or the first gray hair among the black ones. Of course, they missed dinner at the restaurant they were going to, but it was a magical night. The next morning, Travis asked her about his car. Travis, are you thinking about buying another Mustang? Betty asked him in shock. The new ones really look almost exactly like the old classic ones we grew up with. Honey, my Terminator still beats most of those cars. It has a supercharger and is much more aerodynamic. It's the perfect car for me, Travis said, referring to his 2003 Mustang SVT Cobra with all the upgrades. This car makes almost 600 horsepower and weighs less than the new cars. Other than all the fancy electronics they're cramming in there now, it's simply a better car. Besides, I know every little scratch and blemish in its paint. I was there, so it's all like memories that we share. It's the perfect car for me. If it hadn't been destroyed, I would never have needed another car. Then why did you bring this up? Betty asked. I know everything about your car, dear. I know how much you love it and prefer it to newer cars, even though it's almost 10 years old. It may not be the ideal car for someone else, but it's ideal for you. As far as I know, no one else has ever driven it, so I don't think anyone else knows how good or bad it is. I can't even drive it because I can't drive a manual, but if it's perfect for you, that's all that matters. Travis smiled at Betty as she sat in front of the mirror, deciding whether to dye her hair. I bring this up because we're not really talking about my car, Betty, Travis said. We're talking about you. I love you like I love that car. You're perfect just the way you are. It doesn't matter that you're getting older or what others see in you. Okay, you may not be the perfect 20-year-old you were when we met, but I love you, and you're the only one I want. I know every scratch and blemish and every gray hair in your paint, too, and I'm glad and proud that you're mine. Betty started crying and rushed to him. When he said this, she undressed and went back to bed with him, and they started over. This time, their connection was more romantic and less rushed. Both were late for work. Travis still considered himself lucky to have Betty in his life to give him a good foundation. It's much easier for a man to go out and get food when he has someone to bring it home to. Gary was a great young man, that's why Travis wanted to help him get a good start in life. Having the right woman in his life would not only help make Gary more focused but also happier. Gary, you can do it, Travis said. Trav, you should come with me, Gary said. At least just show up at the start. You can hide in the crowd and text me if I'm acting too nervous or something. I can also call or text you if I get nervous or need help. Travis nodded in silent agreement. Half an hour later, Travis was following Gary's kid down the road in his Mustang. Looking at the car, Travis knew he would need to talk to Gary again. Gary needed to get rid of this damn car as soon as possible. A man's car should say something about him, and a gray Kia said all the wrong things about Gary. The restaurant that Gary and the woman he was dating chose was quite nice. It didn't seem too expensive, but it was good. This said several things about the woman. First of all, she wasn't after Gary's money, and secondly, she had good taste. If only the place weren't so far from the city. Travis waited a few minutes after Gary came in so no one would think they were together. He got a seat in a secluded corner near the bar and ordered a beer. He watched as Gary looked around the room. At first, Travis couldn't see the woman because Gary was blocking his view. They were chatting, and he saw Gary take out his phone. Travis felt his iPhone vibrate and looked at the screen. He had a message from Gary. It said, "She's older than I expected and not as pretty, but she seems nice. Should I stay?" Travis sent his message back to Gary. Consider this practice. Have conversations and become more confident with new people. Leave your phone on and record the conversation. Tomorrow we can discuss what you said so you don't make the same mistakes when you find the one you really want. Plus, maybe you'll get lucky. Moments later, Gary sent another message to Travis. "Okay, I'll do it. Gotta go. I told her I was texting a friend at work to say I won't be back today. She wants to go somewhere more private." Travis slumped in his seat, noticing that Gary had stood up. He tried to get a good look at the woman and finally saw her face. His heart stopped when he realized that the woman at Gary's table was his wife. What was Betty doing here? Why was she dating Gary? Was this some kind of prank Betty and Gary were playing on him? By the time Travis gathered his thoughts, Betty and Gary had already left the restaurant. Travis stood up to run after them but was stopped by the waiter who brought him a beer. Travis paid for the beer and ran outside, but Gary and Betty had already left. Travis walked slowly to his car and tried to open the door. He pulled the door handle several times before remembering that he had to unlock it first. He took the keys out of his pocket, unlocked the car, and got inside. He started the car, and for the first time, he did not enjoy the deep roar of the engine and exhaust system. Travis usually didn't turn on the radio in the car and left the window down. He liked to listen to the sounds the car made more than any music, but today was different. Travis didn't even notice the sound of the engine. He sat in the parking lot for a long time before he realized it. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was the question why? Travis didn't have to be home for a few more hours, which gave him plenty of time to think. It was obvious that he had some important decisions to make in his life. No good deed goes unpunished, he thought. He began trying to help Gary bring some stability into his life and lost stability in his own. He wanted to help Gary find a good woman to love instead of some frivolous person. Instead, he discovered that the woman he had loved for half his life was not who he thought she was. Now it seemed that half of Travis's life had been wasted. He thought he was the one to give Gary the benefit of his experience, only to find that he needed the answers himself. Now he only had questions. How long had Betty been doing this? Why did she do this? Didn't she love him? He had no idea how to deal with it or what to do. He turned on the radio for background music and heard the news instead. On this day in 1975, the greatest tragedy on the Great Lakes occurred when Edmund. Travis changed the station. He didn't want to become even more depressed. He drove along the embankment and watched as the autumn winds created ripples and waves on the black water. A huge cargo ship passed him almost silently. He barely noticed it, lost in his thoughts, until the large ship sounded its horn. The big ship was trying to tell him something, but Travis couldn't figure out what it was. Betty Sutton pulled into her driveway, thinking about what a good time she had with the young man she had met. He wasn't an intimate dynamo, but he was ready and capable. If she had time to train him, he might one day become as good as her husband. He wasn't a brute and didn't seek only to satisfy himself. He seemed to genuinely care that she had fun. This was one of the reasons why she only chose men who were looking for a relationship. Suddenly, an alarm bell went off in Betty's head. Her usually empty driveway was not empty. Travis's bright red Mustang was parked right in front of the house. He wasn't supposed to be home for another hour. Betty felt herself begin to sweat as she inserted the key into the lock and entered the house. She looked around for Travis and couldn't find him. He was outside on the terrace, drinking Dos Equis and looking at the moon. She had already showered at the motel, so she came out and sat next to him. "Hello, darling," she said. "I wasn't expecting you so soon. I can prepare something if you want." "I'm not hungry," he said. He didn't ask her where she was, so Betty didn't talk about it either. However, there was something wrong with her husband. For the past 20 years, unless he was angry about something, he would always kiss her or touch her whenever they were close. It didn't matter if they saw each other all day or just for 5 minutes, he always kissed her or stroked her hand. He told her that he only did this to her. He also told her that it was because if something happened to one of them, he wouldn't want their lives to end with the regret of not kissing her goodbye before one of them died. He just sat there looking up at the sky, and Betty thought it was unusual. She moved closer to him, expecting him to hug her. Travis just sat there, looking up. She moved even closer and smiled at him. This movement brought them closer so that her right thigh touched his left. He didn't move away from her, which was good, but he didn't hug her or grab her or even do anything to acknowledge her presence. Then Betty knew for sure that something was wrong, but she didn't know what to do. Being a straightforward person, she simply asked, "Travis, is something wrong?" He didn't say a word, just looked up at the sky as if she wasn't talking. Betty was on the verge of panic. Did he know? How could he know? She was so careful. There was no way he could find out. She sat next to him for another 5 minutes and then came up with an idea. "I'm cold," she said. "Maybe you should grab a jacket or go inside." "No," he said, his voice monotone. There was no anger in him, but there was no usual liveliness either. "Travis, let's go to bed, honey," she said. "I'm not tired," he said. "Me too," she said, smiling at him and taking his hand. "I'll come in a while," he said. Betty was puzzled and worried. Her intimate life with Travis had not been as hot as she wanted, but he had never rejected her until that moment. Something was definitely wrong. On the other hand, she knew Travis better than anyone else on the planet. If he knew what she did, he would be furious. He would scream and demand to know who the guy was. He was angry about something, but she was pretty sure he didn't know what she had done. She stood up and headed towards their house. "I'll wait for you, darling," she said. "Don't make me wait long." As soon as she entered the house, Betty took another shower. This time, she spent a really long time in the shower. She washed her hair and made sure that no part of her body was left untouched by the soap, inside and out. She then blow-dried her short hair and lay in their bed without clothes to wait for Travis. She recalled their life together. The last time he felt this sad was because of stress. He was considering quitting the job he was working at. This was a big decision because instead of staying where he had been for some time, he was considering moving to another company. If it didn't work, it could have affected not only him but her and their children as well. Travis was always very careful when it came to the well-being of his family. He always put her and their children first. She needed to convince him that no matter what was wrong, they would get through it together. She also needed to make sure everything was okay between them too. She fell asleep burdened with her own worries. When she woke up the next day, she was still alone in her bed. She looked out the window, and Travis must have disappeared. She dialed his number on her mobile phone and waited. She heard the call while she was waiting for the connection. Music began to sound below it. It was Van Halen's Ain't Talking About Love. It was one of Travis's favorite songs and also his ringtone. As she walked down the stairs, she saw his phone on the stereo in the living room. Travis must have been really out of his mind. He never left that damn iPhone anywhere. If they went on vacation, he took the phone with him. She dialed his office. Travis' assistant Melissa answered the phone. Betty never loved Melissa, they were complete opposites. Whereas Betty was a middle-aged woman and beginning to decline, Melissa was only 24. She started working for Travis right after college and seemed to be getting more beautiful every day. Betty had short dark hair, while Melissa had long, rich brown hair with blonde streaks. Betty was curvy, while Melissa was slim and fit. The thing Betty hated most about the girl was that she was as completely devoted to Travis as Betty was. Melissa even turned down an opportunity to get a promotion last year to stay with Travis. This made Betty's ears stand on end, not that she had any reason to worry. Betty became friends with several people working at Travis's company. If something was going on, she would know about it. She heard that Melissa was flirting with Travis all the time, but Travis didn't seem to notice or do anything about it. Betty thought about asking Travis to find another assistant but decided it was better not to. First of all, Travis never showed any intention of cheating on her with Melissa or anyone else. Secondly, if Melissa left, then her replacement could also go after Travis and be more successful at it. Finally, there was also the fact that if Melissa was interested in Travis, she would have made sure that no other woman around them got close to him. Thus, Melissa, without even knowing it, became Betty's watchdog. Betty also maintained a polite, if cold, relationship with Melissa. "Melissa, when Travis gets here, tell him to call me," Betty said. "Sorry, Mrs. Sutton," Melissa said. "Travis is already here. He's early for a big meeting. He'll probably be busy all day. From the looks of it, the meeting will keep them here late into the evening and even continue for most of tomorrow. You'll probably have a better chance of talking to him when he gets home tonight than I have, but I'll tell him you called." That's fine, Betty thought. It's clear that something really big is going on at Travis's job. This is something that worries him very much. It must not be. He could easily find another job, and maybe if he did, he wouldn't have to work so hard. This news calmed Betty down a bit, but she was still annoyed with Melissa. As soon as the girl finished saying what she wanted to say, she hung up. She didn't give Betty a chance to respond to what she said or even say goodbye. There was another very subtle, biting jab that the girl made. She called Betty Miss Sutton. Calling her M. Sutton implied that she and Betty were casual acquaintances or just people who knew each other through work but were not close. This is despite the fact that Melissa had been to their house several times for parties or celebrations that had nothing to do with work. Betty often told Melissa to call her Betty. The girl's refusal to do so was offensive because it sent the message that Melissa simply did not want to be friendly with Betty. On the other hand, she called Travis by his first name, and even the way she said Travis was so familiar it was almost as if the girl's mouth was enjoying the sound of it. Betty might have to reconsider her decision to keep Melissa as an assistant for her husband. The look on Melissa's face when she hung up was ominous. If looks could kill, Melissa would be convicted and found guilty of Betty's murder within moments. As she headed towards the door that separated Travis's office from her own, someone walked into her office. It was Barney Clark, the account manager. He often came into the office under the pretext of discussing one issue or another with Travis. Barney took one look at Melissa in her short skirt and swallowed loudly. She whipped her head around to look at him, and his eyes grew even larger as her mane of hair fell over her shoulders. "Is there anything I can help you with, Mr. Clark?" she asked, fearing the answer. "No, I just came by to ask Travis a few questions about the new product line," he said. Melissa knew it was nonsense. Travis only handled corporate accounts. He probably had no idea about any of the company's specific products. It simply wasn't his job. "I'll tell him you came by," she said, beaming with a smile. "He's in a meeting with Gary right now." "Okay, thanks," Clark said. He watched as Melissa turned to check on Travis. He got what he wanted. She turned around, and he got to enjoy the sight of her but bouncing up and down like two cats fighting under her skirt. Normally, Melissa would have waited until he left, but she needed to find out what was going on with Travis. Before she got to the door, it opened, and Travis and Gary walked out. She noticed that as soon as the door began to open, Barney Clark ran out of the office like a cockroach when someone turns on the light. "Thanks for your help, Travis," Gary smiled. "It's great to have a mentor like you." Melissa noticed that Gary was smiling happily, and Travis looked even worse than when he walked in. Gary was a small, homely man in whom Melissa simply had no interest. He wasn't creepy or weird, but she found him boring. Today was different, however. Gary was grinning from ear to ear like a schoolboy learning about something for the first time. He even walked up to her and looked her in the eye. "When I walked into Travis's office, something turned this gray mouse into a tiger," Gary said, looking straight into her eyes and smiling as he walked past Travis. Melissa prepared to follow Travis back to his inner office but was surprised when Gary blocked her path. "Melissa, are you busy tonight?" Gary asked, looking straight into her cleavage. "Gary," Melissa replied sharply, "my eyes are up here, and I'm busy every evening." She then walked around him and followed Travis into his office. Or tried to, because she found his door locked. Melissa knocked on Travis's door. When he didn't answer or open it, she used her emergency key and opened it herself. She entered the office quietly and was unprepared for what she found. Travis had come very early in the morning, which in itself was unusual. Then he told her that if Betty called, to tell her that he would be busy in meetings all day. This meant that he and his wife had probably had a fight. If Travis and Betty were fighting, there was no doubt whose side Melissa would be on. But seeing Travis, who was usually tough as a rock, with his head down on the table, angered Melissa even more than Betty's call. "I'm going to kill her," Melissa thought. She walked around the table and began to gently massage Travis's back and shoulders. She did this for a long time, enjoying the unusual closeness and intimacy. To most observers, this would not seem like anything inappropriate, but the sensations it gave Melissa, who had long been in love with her boss, caused a storm inside her. "Thanks, Mel," Travis said. He touched her hand gently, and this caused a new wave of tingling to run through her body. "Trav, what did she do this time?" Melissa asked. "That's not what I want to talk about," Travis said. "Melissa," she replied sharply, "whatever upset you so much is my business. We're a team. If you're not in the game, the whole team suffers. So if I have to suffer, I want to know why. Besides, you told Gary, and I've known you and worked for you much longer than he has. You're going to start hurting my feelings here." "Gary doesn't know anything," Travis snapped. "I trust you more than anyone, Mel. You already know that." Melissa was inwardly relieved that he said he trusted her more than anyone. He didn't say more than anyone but Betty or put any conditions on his statement. He trusted her more than anyone. Her heart was doing somersaults. "Then, Travis, go ahead and tell me." "Maybe I can help," she said. At such times, her southern accent became more pronounced, and her voice trembled slightly. Travis hesitated and then began to speak. I know that Betty is cheating on me," he said. Melissa was shocked, her mind was racing. Maybe she'd go to Travis's house and beat up Betty. After all, the satisfaction she would get from hurting Betty for hurting Travis would be worth going to jail for assault. Melissa realized that Travis needed to make his own decisions. Her job was simply to be there, support him, and help him pick up the pieces. Regardless of his wishes, she knew. In my opinion, Travis should have divorced Betty. But realistically speaking, Melissa thought that Travis should have divorced Betty for a good reason. So there was nothing new there. But why did Gary sleep with Betty? Melissa asked. "It doesn't make sense. You went with him to help, and he betrayed you. Plus, no offense, but Betty is pretty old, even for someone as desperate as Gary." "Ma, you have to remember," Travis said. "Gary has never been to my house. He's never met Betty. The only pictures he's ever seen are the ones on the wall. They were taken over 10 years ago, her hair was a different color back then, and she's gotten a little older since then. He had no idea that the woman who answered his ad was my wife," Travis said. "And I didn't see her well until they were getting ready to leave. By the time I left the restaurant, they had already left." "Maybe he was lying about them having an intimate," Melissa suggested. "Guys always lie about it." "Bad luck," Travis said. "I told him to record their conversation on his iPhone. That way, if he said or did something stupid, we could talk about it." So, on his next date, whether it was with her or someone else, he would do better. Gary was so nervous that he forgot to turn off his phone. He wrote everything down, and it wasn't his fault. Gary was such a gentleman that it was perfect. She suggested he go to a motel. She was the one who took all the first steps. "Don't worry about it, Melissa," she said sharply. "We'll fire Gary and divorce her cheating fifth place." Will Melissa suddenly stop? She allowed her anger to make her more aggressive than she should have been. "Sorry, Travis," she said. I'm just so angry that she could do this to you. We'll handle this the way you want. Mal, I've been thinking about this for a long time, Travis said. None of this is Gary's fault. He had no idea Betty was married to me, and if you listen to the tape, she was in the driver's seat. So what do you want to do? Melissa asked. Should I start looking for divorce lawyers or marriage counselors? Honestly, I just don't know, Travis said. Maybe because I encountered this less than 24 hours ago. I'm just in shock. I'm surprised and hurt, and I have a lot of feelings that I can't even begin to describe. Mal, I never thought I'd be in this situation. I never thought Betty would do something like that. I really believed that she loved me. I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives together. Sometimes when I hear about divorces, I understand all these modern things, but I always thought that the only way for Betty and me to separate was if one of us died. I've even always thought about what I would do if Betty left before me, you know? Would I date someone else, or would I just grow old, taking care of our grandchildren? Travis said. And what would you do? Melissa asked. Ask the meeting idea seems right for you, Travis said. Honestly, I wish I could feel something now, he said. But to be honest, all I feel right now is emptiness. I'm hurt, I'm upset with Betty, but it's not even anger. All I feel right now is nothing. I wish I could just lash out at her, scream, and figure out what to do. I'm sure it will come in time. So, maybe you could find me a marriage counselor and a divorce lawyer? Melissa asked. She listened to his every word but still did not understand what he was asking. Yes, Travis said. I need a marriage counselor and a divorce lawyer. You choose them. Melissa nodded her head, and all her beautiful hair fell over her shoulders. She already had a plan in her head. She needed to find out who the best divorce lawyer in the state was. Maybe she'd find the best divorce lawyer in the country. Then she had to find the worst marriage counselor in the world, possibly even the worst marriage counselor in the universe. She wanted to find someone so bad that he would just give up and tell all his clients to just get a divorce. Perhaps she could find someone so bad that he didn't even show up for scheduled meetings. She'd get to it right away. Melissa took Travis to lunch that day. She took him to Pizza Hut. She still laughed about it because someone of Travis's age and income should really be going to a restaurant that wasn't the same one he loved when he was a teenager. But his boyish side was just one of the things she loved about him, and if she played her cards right, she would have the opportunity to learn much more about him. While they ate, Melissa just listened to Travis talk. She listened as he talked about how he met Betty and all the things he loved about her. However, as the conversation progressed, he began to mention some things that he did not like about his wife. Melissa memorized all this information for future use. She spent a lot of time touching him and gently massaging and comforting him, both physically and mentally. She just wanted him to feel loved and cared for. Before they finished lunch, she gave him contact information for a counselor and a lawyer. A few hours later, Travis Colbert drove into his driveway. He walked past Betty into the house without saying a word. Betty turned off the TV and stood up as soon as she heard Travis' Mustang in the yard. She spent the entire day preparing his favorite dinner. She also wore one of his favorite outfits. She wanted him to feel comfortable, and maybe then he would tell her what was going on. It couldn't be that bad, of course. Travis had many years dedicated to this work, and she knew that good jobs were hard to come by. But with Travis's skills and experience, it wouldn't be difficult for him to find another job. Plus, they had a decent amount of money saved up over the years. One way or another, they would get by. Betty turned and smiled as the door opened. Travis didn't even look at her. He simply walked past her and went upstairs. She stood there for a second, with a smile frozen on her lips. Then she got angry. Travis had never treated her so badly in all the years they had been together. If he treated her like that, they would never have gotten married. And Betty wasn't going to put up with it now. She ran upstairs to their bedroom and slipped on the last step. She fell face down in front of their bedroom, tearing her dress. Now she was even more angry. The dress was one of her favorites, as was Travis's. She opened the door and entered their bedroom, but no one was there. She looked into the adjoining bathroom, and there was no one there either. Finally, she tried to go into the guest room, and there her husband lay looking at the ceiling. "Travis," she screamed. Her anger over the ruined dress and her husband's strange behavior overpowered her common sense, and she began to shout at him. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Travis just looked at her like she was crazy. Sometimes, it takes a lot of grievances or a pattern of behavior for a person to move. Sometimes not. Sometimes it can be the smallest thing that disturbs the balance here or there. Betty's actions the night before had put a significant strain on their marriage, more than she knew. Travis vacillated between wanting to confront her and simply writing off her actions as a one-time incident and moving on. He didn't feel right letting her get away with it, but at the same time, he wasn't sure he wanted a divorce. Betty's scream was the last straw. Travis suddenly sat down on the edge of the bed and simply smiled. Betty saw the smile and completely misinterpreted it. "What's so funny to you, dear?" she asked. "You," Travis said. Betty was shocked. She couldn't understand what was happening. Travis suddenly stood up and walked into their bedroom. He went straight to his closet and started packing his things. "Are you going on a business trip again?" Betty asked. "Is this one of those trips where I can go with you?" "No to both questions," Travis said calmly. "Then why are you packing?" Betty asked. "If you think about it, I'm sure you can figure it out," Travis said. Betty just stood there and looked at him. He took everything he could pack. He moved quickly and very confidently. "It's because of that little tramp in your office, isn't it?" Betty said sharply. "You slept with her, and now you want to move in with her." Travis simply turned and looked at Betty as if she had grown a second head. "This has nothing to do with Melissa," Travis said. "I didn't sleep with her, and never have. But who knows what might happen in the future." "I knew it was because of her," Betty said sharply. "I want you to fire tomorrow. She's always picking on you." "It's good that someone is looking out for me," Travis said. "Travis, you're an idiot," Betty said sharply. "I'm not refusing you. I had my period last week. You know how much I suffer at this time. Yesterday was the first day that I could do anything, and I tried to make love to you when you came home. You refused, remember? So if you're mad because you didn't get it, you better grow up." She approached him. "I want you as much as you want me. But after 20 years together, you should already know how my cycle works." She sighed. "Maybe the reason you don't know is because I'm not important to you. I'm just someone you can come home to and have a night with whenever and however you want. If I can't satisfy you, then I'm nothing to you. Is that what you want, Travis?" Travis continued to pack his things. "Well, Travis, if that's what you want, this is it," Betty said. The thought of Travis just taking her was actually starting to excite Betty. She lay down on the bed. Travis didn't even slow down. He grabbed the suitcases he had packed and headed down the stairs. Betty jumped out of bed, still without anything, and ran after him, screaming the whole way. She made it to the bottom of the stairs just in time to hear the door slam shut. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch of her house, her bare breasts swinging freely. She was just in time to see the mailman walk up onto her porch. He stared at her. Betty realized the situation and decided that since he had already seen everything, she would run after Travis. She grabbed the handle of his car door and missed, just as he drove away. Betty slowly walked back into the house, wondering what the hell happened to Travis. A flash of something white caught her eye, and she looked down at the floor. It was a business card that must have fallen out of Travis's pocket. When she looked at the card, she realized that she had been putting too much pressure on Travis. He was probably suffering from some kind of stress. The card was from a marriage and emotional therapy counselor. Her poor baby was so sick he had to see a therapist, and she just started yelling at him. All the pressure he faced at work and the stress they had at home played a role. He just wanted to be alone for a while. When he got home, he just went upstairs and laid down on the bed. And she went crazy. She needed to find him and convince him to come home. She called his cell phone and then remembered that it was still lying on the table. She had no way to contact him until he calmed down, so she decided to just stay home and sit by the phone. When he calmed down, he would call her. They had been married for 20 years, and neither of them could even imagine how to live without each other. She decided to give him a day or two to calm down before going crazy. She called the counselor and tried to find out what was wrong with Travis. Once she convinced the counselor that she was Travis's wife, he still couldn't give her any information about Travis or what he would be receiving treatment for. But the counselor told her that if Travis gave his permission, she could be involved. 2 days later, Betty called Travis's office. She didn't want to talk to Travis unless he was ready. She really wanted to talk to that useless young woman who worked for Travis. "Hello, Melissa," Betty began. She only heard a beep. They must have been turned off. It probably wasn't a blackout. Even after all the time she worked for Travis, this stupid girl probably still couldn't work the phone system properly. Betty called again. "Melissa, the beep sounded again." Melissa had just hung up. Not once, but twice. "Wait until Travis finds out what she did. He'll fire this stupid girl immediately." Betty grabbed her coat and purse and drove to Travis's office. She took the elevator to his floor and entered his office. Melissa barely raised her head when Betty entered. "Why did you hang up?" Betty asked sharply. "Get your things. You're fired." "You can't fire me, Mrs. Sutton." "You don't work here," Melissa said. "No, but Travis can, and as soon as I leave his office, he will," Betty said. "Do you have a recording?" Melissa asked. "I don't need a damn tape to see my own husband, you stupid," Betty snapped. Melissa pressed a button on her intercom and simply smiled. "There's no point in trying to smile and be nice now," Betty blurted out. Melissa continued to smile. Betty walked past her and went to Travis's door. She turned the knob and found it locked. "Do you have a key to this damn door?" Betty asked. Melissa smiled and nodded her head. "So why are you sitting there like an idiot? Open the damn door, you moron." Just as Betty began her tirade, 2 large security guards entered the office. Madam, there's no reason for such language," said the first guard. "Hi, Melvin," Melissa said. He nodded to her and smiled. "She wants to see Travis, but she doesn't have an appointment. Plus, he left me instructions not to take calls from her. Besides, he's not even in the building right now, he's with his lawyer. Could you escort her out of here?" "We both heard her insult you," said the second guard. "Do you want to sue her?" "We could hold her until the police come." "I like this idea," Melissa smiled. "They probably won't do anything serious other than take her to the station, but it will be documented how she's been behaving." The 2 men escorted Betty out of the room. "You're going to pay for this," Betty screamed. Several people in the office heard her and saw her being taken out. She turned to Melissa as the guards each grabbed her arm and pulled her away. Several people came out of their offices to see what was happening. One of them was Gary. He saw Betty being led out of Travis's office and heard her screaming and yelling. When their eyes met, Betty fell silent. In turn, Gary looked at her intently. When the guards took her away, he went straight to Melissa's office. "Who is this woman?" he asked Melissa. "Why was she here?" Melissa looked at Gary with obvious irritation. Gary almost recoiled when he saw the indignation in her gaze. "What did I do to you?" he asked. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "You didn't have to do anything to me," Melissa snapped. She closed the door, and Gary followed Melissa into Travis's inner office. "We probably shouldn't be here if Travis isn't here," Gary said hesitantly. He had a feeling that Melissa had brought him to the office for something illegal. He wasn't against the idea, but would prefer to do it in a place where he wouldn't risk losing his job. "You know, maybe we should wait. A lot of people saw us come in here and close the door." Suddenly, he noticed that she was just standing there, looking at him while he was ogling her. "Sorry," he said, "but you're so beautiful." "Gary, shut up," Melissa said sharply. "How can one person be so stupid, so clueless, and still functioning?" "What?" Gary said. "Gary, I don't care if you look at my breasts," Melissa smiled. "If only you understood that this is a waste of your time. I am absolutely not attracted to you. If you were the last man on earth, I would start loving women. As far as I remember, you always looked at me like some kind of strange old pervert. But you're not a strange old pervert, you're worse. You're a healthy man about my age. Why aren't you looking for someone who's interested in you? Gary sat down on the table, his newly found confidence was gone. So, Gary, the woman you were dating didn't want to fall in love with you or anyone else. She was just looking for intim. Now you're in the middle of what could be a divorce case. Gary, she has a husband and 2 children. Is that what's made you so proud and confident lately, Gary? You're really feeling good about yourself because you finally had a night, not realizing that you've destroyed a family in the process. Gary dropped his head to his chest. He looked up, and his whole expression changed. But he began. You didn't know, did you, Gary? Melissa asked. It's not your fault, right? You probably also didn't know that her husband found out about what she did. You probably weren't the first person she cheated with, if that's any consolation, Gary. But you were the worst. Why am I the worst? Gary began again. Before he could finish his thought, Melissa crossed the office and was in his face. For a moment, Gary felt afraid. He was sure she was going to hit him. Why? Gary couldn't understand why she was so angry with him. Because you're the one who got caught, the stupid one, Melissa replied sharply. It doesn't matter if that old slut slept with 50 guys. None of them hurt her husband because he didn't know about them. You, Gary, are the one who, as usual, ruined everything and destroyed the family. Melissa, I'm sorry, Gary said. His voice sounded like he was on the verge of tears. Melissa just looked at him with anger. I didn't do it on purpose. I'm just like everyone else. I'm lonely, and I'm tired of being alone. I was just looking for someone, too. Gary's voice cracked, and tears appeared in the corners of his eyes. We were together for 20 years, Melissa. Damn you, I wanted it to end, but it didn't. I didn't want him to suffer like that. Damn, I'd give anything to get them back together again. I don't mind waiting for him. He's worth it. Melissa was now muttering to herself and began to cry. What does this have to do with you, Melissa? Gary asked. Is this woman related to you? No, fool, said Melissa. Do you even know her name? Of course, said Gary. Her name is Ginger. Ginger Grant, Gary said. Gary, you're an idiot, Melissa snapped. Ginger Grant is the redhead from Gilligan's Island. That woman is Betty Sutton. Gary sank further onto the table. The pose he adopted made it appear as if he had no spine or any bone structure. He began to sob. I didn't know. I didn't know, he repeated over and over. The phone on Melissa's desk rang, breaking the moment. Melissa ran to her desk and picked up the phone. She talked for a few moments, and Gary couldn't understand her conversation. She then returned to the office and looked at Gary. Gary, get out of here, she said. It was Travis. He's on his way here. I told him to stop by the house and get his phone, which he left there, but it shouldn't take him more than 15 minutes. Go and get to work. But I have to tell him how sorry I am, Gary said. And I'm sorry for all the times I looked at you. I'll never do that again, just because you're so beautiful. Gary, you don't look at me because I'm pretty, Melissa said. If that were the case, you'd be looking at my face. It's not your fault, and you're not the only one here who does this. There are 3 types of you perverts. Type 1 looks at my chest, Type 2 looks at my 5th place, and Type 3 looks at my legs. Maybe I was just taking it out on you for all of them. I guess that's just how most men are. But you're really beautiful, Gary said. Very beautiful. Gary, what color are my eyes? Melissa asked, closing her eyes as she asked. Blue? Gary asked. Gary, my eyes are brown, just like my hair. Did you even notice that I have eyes? Travis doesn't blame you for what happened. He's still in shock, he's suffering a lot, but he doesn't know what he's going to do, and the creature, as far as I know, doesn't even know that he knows. Did you give her your phone number? Gary nodded. Well, when the police are done with her, which won't take long, she'll call you. If you really want to do something good for Travis, don't let her know that Travis knows. In fact, don't let her know that you know Travis. It's a very large company with a lot of employees. There's a very good chance you both could work here without knowing each other, Melissa said. Gary nodded and returned to his own office. Betty Sutton was furious. She was angrier than she had ever been in her life. As soon as she pulled into her street, she noticed Travis's Mustang pulling out of their driveway and heading in the opposite direction. She tried to call him from the police station but remembered that he did not have a phone. The police did not bring any charges against her, but they recorded a complaint and warned her to stay away from Melissa. Now that Betty had calmed down, she realized that she had handled the situation poorly. The best way to deal with this would be to wait a few days until Travis came out of his funk. Then she would do what she should have done in the first place. She would put Travis to bed, and after they made love, she would ask him to find another assistant. It was time for Melissa to learn her place. Betty and Travis had been together for 20 years. They had children and a wonderful life. Travis was kind of depressed right now, but every marriage goes through its ups and downs. This was the norm in modern marriage. The most important thing was that she loved Travis and he loved her. Case closed. Betty entered the house. She was so angry last night that she forgot to put the food away. All the time she spent preparing this dinner and all the money she spent on meat and other ingredients was wasted. She went upstairs and took a shower. Coming out of the shower, she lay down without clothes on her bed. She was so tired, she needed sleep. All the drama she had experienced that morning had left her exhausted. When Travis walked into his office, he felt a little better. It was like after a shot. At first, it hurts like hell. The pain is so intense that it blocks all other sensations and stimuli. But after a few hours, it just becomes a deep, sharp pain. Betty's betrayal still hurt like hell, but it was a deep, sharp pain. He still felt it very strongly, but it no longer blocked out everything else that was happening. He saw Melissa sitting at her desk, answering the phone. She hung up and wrote something down on her notepad. Travis waved at her and for the first time noticed that she was angry with him. He walked into his office and was about to sit down at his desk when he heard the door slam behind him. The door slammed so hard that the walls shook. He reacted like a startled deer and jumped back almost a foot. He turned around and saw that it was Melissa who had slammed the door. She stood in front of him, breathing so heavily she was almost hyperventilating. Travis tried not to notice that each breath made her chest rise and fall, and the view was magnificent. "The guards told me something about what happened, Mel." "I'm so sorry," Travis said. "You shouldn't have to put up with this from Betty or anyone else. You have every right to be angry. Who cares about your idiotic wife?" Melissa replied sharply. "I'm mad at you." "What have I done, Travis?" she asked. "Why the hell are you staying at some cheap motel, Travis?" Melissa screamed. "Melissa, I was going to tell you, because I knew you'd be worried," Travis began. "I thought a lot and left Betty last night, Travis. I googled the motel you called from. This is not the best place for you. There are probably easy girls there, and you are too vulnerable right now. I need to find you a safe place," Melissa said. But Travis began. "No buts," Melissa replied sharply. "Have you seen a therapist to try to salvage this disaster?" "No, I went to a lawyer to try to end this disaster," Travis said quietly. Melissa sadly and silently shook her head. "You can tell me about it at lunch, Trav." "You pay," she said, closing the door softly. The door didn't quite close correctly. She would need to call someone from maintenance to fix it. She walked past her desk and into the office supply closet. She took a deep breath and finally allowed herself to show her true feelings. "Oh yes," she said quietly, clenching her fist. After a while, Melissa looked at Travis across the restaurant table. They went to Red Lobster for lunch. This was Melissa's favorite place. She knew Travis preferred Texas Roadhouse, but it was shrimp season. Melissa ordered the unlimited shrimp buffet, and Travis, true to his habits, ordered the steak. "Honey, you won't like this steak," Melissa laughed. "Why order a steak from a seafood place? We'll go to Texas Roadhouse for dinner. Tell me about the visit to the lawyer." "Honestly, it was an eye-opener," Travis said. I came expecting to tell him how she cheated on me and to hear how I could keep most of our assets. He very quickly made me understand that it doesn't matter who did what. Justice and law are not only two completely different things, but they don't even live in the same area and don't like each other. Betty could have hung a sign on our front porch that said we'll have a night for food and spent most of the day bent over with her dress-up entertaining sailors. In the eyes of the law, she would still be entitled to half of our assets. If she had even had an intim with sailors for free, even after I gave her half of everything we own, I would have to pay her alimony. It's not fair, Melissa said. This is not about fairness, Travis said. It's about the law. 20 minutes before the end of the day, Melissa brought some documents into Travis's office to sign. We'll be leaving soon, she said. We need to stop by your cheap motel and pick up your things. For what? Travis asked. Melissa's eyes flashed again, and he remembered her anger earlier that day. I already told you that I found a better place for you, Melissa said. We'll move your things, get you settled, and then you can treat me to dinner. Travis nodded in agreement. He noticed Melissa's anger faded and her smile lit up the room as he agreed with her. Travis wanted to do something. Any action would be better than returning to his hotel room again. His iPhone rang twice that day, both times it was Betty. Both times, he sent the calls to voicemail and then deleted the messages without fully listening to them. In both cases, she started with something like, I don't understand what's wrong with you. Obviously, she still had no idea that he knew about her actions. Melissa followed Travis back to his motel. She looked around and shook her head. She looked through all his things, even his underwear drawer. Once he had packed all his belongings back into their suitcases and loaded them into the trunk of his car and into the back seat, they drove off. Travis noticed that Melissa kept writing things down. He wondered what she was taking notes about this time. He followed her to the new, better motel she had found for him. They stopped in front of a large, well-lit, beautifully decorated building. Melissa got out of her car and picked up one of Travis's suitcases. Travis thought she must have known the building manager. It looked like she had found him an apartment. They took the elevator to the 5th floor, and Melissa took out her keys and opened the door. Travis looked around and found himself inside a nicely furnished apartment. Who lives here? He asked. We are, Melissa said. Travis opened his mouth to start telling Melissa that he couldn't stay with her and saw her eyes light up again. But, he began. We'll talk about it over dinner, Melissa said. For now, stay in my guest bedroom. It's the one on the right. Travis put his suitcases in the room Melissa showed him. He knew he shouldn't even be thinking about it. Perhaps it would be better to just go home until he found another place. 10 minutes later, they were in Travis's Mustang, speeding down the highway. They agreed not to talk about work, Betty, or anything serious until dinner. Until then, they were just two friends going out for a nice dinner. Their problems would still be there after they ate. After an hour or so, Melissa looked across the table at Travis and smiled. I'm mad at you, she said. For what this time? He asked. It was the best steak I've ever eaten, she replied sharply. Why do you always take me to Red Lobster? I thought Red Lobster was your favorite place, Travis said. It was, Melissa smiled. Okay, honey, we can start having a serious conversation. Melissa, I appreciate the offer, but I can't stay with you, Travis said. And you should probably know that I had a chance this afternoon to think things over, and I have no intention of divorcing Betty. Melissa looked offended. Are you going to stay with her after everything she did to you? She asked quietly. To hell with it, Travis replied sharply. I just don't see the point in giving her half of what I worked so hard for 20 years. I gave her everything she asked for. I was there for her through thick and thin, and this is what I got in return. Think about all the chances that I had to cheat on her, but I never did. So if the law is not on my side, then I'll just leave her, let her stay with the house. But good luck paying for it. Plus, I'll probably say I'll never get married again, so I don't need a divorce, Travis said. Travis, what does this have to do with staying with me? Melissa asked. Melissa, you're a wonderful young woman. You don't need some angry, resentful middle-aged guy getting in the way of your lifestyle. Besides, what will people think of you living with a man? He asked. Travis, you're a fool. You think I'm doing this out of nobility? Melissa asked. I have my reasons for wanting you to stay with me. Believe me, I gained something from this. You're not going anywhere until I say you can. Melissa looked into Travis's eyes and didn't blink. Travis stared back at her, and for a long moment, neither of them wanted to back down. And then Travis blinked. Glad we got that worked out, Melissa said. Over the next few weeks, Betty called Travis every day. He never spoke to her. He talked to the kids when they called and even talked to his parents and his in-laws when they called, but he didn't explain any of his reasons for not coming home. Finally, Betty began to come up with her own reasons. She was sure that Travis had found another woman. How the hell could he cheat on her after 20 years of marriage? She hired a lawyer and filed for divorce. She didn't really want a divorce and told her lawyer so. Her plan was to force Travis to return to her by threatening divorce. At the very least, he had to come to the meeting so they could talk. The meeting was scheduled for November 29th, 5 days after Thanksgiving. Betty also tried to call Gary. He also refused to take her calls. This surprised her, even when she hinted that she might be interested in repeating their encounter. He hung up. It didn't really matter to Betty, he wasn't very experienced in bed anyway. She had always assumed it would be a one-time adventure. She just didn't have time to find someone else. Finally, she got her lucky break. Her mother called her and reminded her about Thanksgiving. Usually, they alternated whose house they spent the holiday at, one year with Travis's parents, the next year with Betty's parents, and other years with Travis and Betty. This year, it was Betty's parents' turn. Travis and Betty's daughter, Becky, would not attend. She spent the holiday with her boyfriend's family. So, it would be Betty, Travis, Betty's parents, their son Stephen and his girlfriend, and Betty's sister Debbie and her husband, an intimate family meeting. It would be an ideal chance for her to talk to Travis and resolve their issues. She missed him so much that she could hardly bear it. The good news was that Betty's mom told her that she had talked to Travis and he was coming. Sure, she told Travis that Betty wouldn't be there, but that was a white lie. Betty's mom reasoned that if she could get them back together, all would eventually be forgiven. So, Betty had her chance. She needed to look her best for dinner. Betty usually treated Thanksgiving like just another holiday, but this one was going to be special. She was going to do whatever it took to get her husband back. Then, she could actually be grateful for something. It's strange, but since Travis left, it's affected me in ways I never would have expected. When Travis was home, I had my own little affairs to spice up our intimate life. I did this mainly to add excitement and variety to my life. There was nothing wrong with our intimate life, I just wanted more and more variety. But since Travis left, I haven't gone out on a date. Now that I have so much time for my pleasures, I simply have no interest in them. The main focus of my life is trying to win back the man I loved for over 20 years, at any cost. She couldn't come to his work because the guards wouldn't let her in. She thought about making an appointment with someone in the building, but why would she bother with a corporate sales company? She thought about asking that guy, Gary, to make an appointment for her. Then, she could have just waited for Melissa to leave the office or waylaid Travis on his way to or from the office. But every time she tried to contact Gary by phone, he simply hung up. It was weird because before they slept together, Gary was always talking to her on the phone. Once they did, he wanted nothing to do with her. She had dated a few of these guys in college, but she was sure that men must have evolved beyond that by then. The problem was that she expected every man to treat her like Travis. She wondered why he allowed his problems, whatever they were, to tear them apart. She still didn't know why he left. She turned it over in her mind several times. Travis was suffering from some sort of work-related stress disorder. He came home and got angry at her about something really stupid, but she didn't know what. Travis then simply packed his things and left. The only information she had about him for the past 3 weeks had come from their children and now from her mother. Her daughter seemed upset that Travis seemed to have another woman wherever he stayed. The thought that he might cheat on her made Betty very sick, but she still wanted him back. Travis seemed to attribute his stress to her. He seemed to think that Betty was to blame for all the stress in his life. If Travis really had a woman with him, Betty would have forgiven him, since he was probably out of his mind. But he should have ended the relationship immediately. There was no room for cheating in their marriage. In the back of her mind, Betty was thinking about her little adventures, but her flings were different. There was no emotional connection between her and any of them. She only saw each guy once. It was only night. The only man she truly loved was Travis. What Travis did, on the other hand, was wrong. He only seemed to be dating one woman, and Becky, their daughter, made it seem like that woman was living with Travis. Becky told her mother that she called her father late that night and the woman picked up his cell phone. Her voice sounded familiar to Becky, but she couldn't figure out who it was. The woman told Becky that her father was in the shower and that she would ask him to call back as soon as possible. Either way, whatever was going on with Travis was going to be resolved in a few days at Thanksgiving dinner. Betty was surprised at how much she was looking forward to it. He might even come home with her that night. Betty hadn't had an intimate with anyone since Gary left. She missed intimate. She missed making love with her husband. Thanksgiving couldn't come soon enough. "Mel, maybe you should get dressed," Travis said. "Well, that's news," Melissa laughed. "Honestly, Travis, I don't remember a man saying that to me. Besides, it's just the two of us here. I've been wearing clothes all day at work. Now that we're home, I want to relax. If you weren't here, I probably wouldn't wear anything at all." Travis looked at Melissa. He couldn't help but look at her. Melissa was thin and short. She was also beautiful. Although her breasts were large, they were not huge. In fact, they were probably smaller than Betty's, who had average-sized breasts. The difference was that Melissa was so small that it made them seem huge. You could actually see her breasts, just the edges of them, from behind because her torso was so narrow. Her waist was so thin that Travis could wrap both arms around her and touch his fingers. Her hips spread out from that thin waist, and her buttocks extended dangerously away from her spine. She had long, slender legs and always wore heels. Travis looked away from Melissa before his eyes got him into trouble. In the 3 weeks since he moved in with Melissa, things had moved very quickly. He started looking for his own apartment several times, but always stopped the first time he picked up one of those apartment finding brochures. He left it on the kitchen table so he wouldn't forget to look at it. When he returned, the brochure had disappeared. He bought another one, and it also disappeared. He found several sites and saved them to his favorites. He even bookmarked a few apartments for viewing. When he returned to look at them again, they had been removed from his favorites. He began to suspect that Melissa had something to do with it. Before he could confront her about this, he was contacted by the lawyer who represented Betty. The lawyer tried to convince him to accept counseling or face divorce from Betty. His lawyer spoke with Betty and her lawyer and was convinced that it was a ploy to get him to meet with Betty. Travis's lawyer explained to him that if he allowed Betty to file for divorce, he could gain some benefits. Their first meeting was scheduled for a few days after Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, Travis and Melissa were together almost 24/7. They ate together, worked together, and relaxed together. The only thing they didn't do at that time was sleep together. They went out to restaurants or to shows several times a week, but most evenings, they just sat and talked on their balcony or watched TV together. "Mel, we need to talk," Travis said. "And what you're wearing prevents me from saying what I need to say." Melissa jumped up and put on her robe. "Okay, Travis, sir, is that better, sir?" she asked, giving him a mocking salute. Even the robe couldn't hide Melissa's body, but it was a start. She sat down across from him on the couch, and her robe fell open to reveal a huge stretch of tanned legs, making Travis's pants feel tighter in the crotch. "Melissa, you've done so much for me that I'll probably never be able to thank you enough," Travis began. "But I'm starting to feel like I'm taking advantage of you. It's like I'm forcing you to put your life on hold. You're 24 years old, you should be dating and experiencing life. Don't sit in your apartment with me, dealing with my issues with my dad." For a moment, Melissa's eyes flashed with furious anger. But then she smiled at him, and her legs opened a little wider. "Travis, if you think you're taking advantage of me, then you might as well pay half the rent. If you weren't here, I'd still have to pay for it myself. Plus, the fact is, you've spent the last 3 weeks on dinners for me more than I spend on groceries. Your presence makes me feel protected and not so lonely. Despite what you think, you are not stopping my life. In fact, I feel like my life has just begun. I know my age. When you were the same age, you already had a child, didn't you? Travis nodded. So that means maybe it's time for me to get serious about life, and that's what I did, Travis. I'm dating someone. It's someone you see all the time, you just don't know that we're meeting. And my life is filled beyond words, you just haven't seen it yet. I don't see myself stuck here with you at all. I enjoy our time together more than anything. And Travis, daddy issues happen to girls who either never knew their fathers or didn't have the relationship they wanted. My dad was a wonderful man, he loved me, and I loved him. He died of cancer in his sophomore year of college. My relationship with you has nothing to do with him or any fixation on your father. Is there anything else you want to complain about? Travis swallowed and then nodded. Well, spit it out, she purred. We are wasting time that we could spend watching TV. What will you do for Thanksgiving? Travis asked. I usually either go spend it with my sister and her family or go out with friends, Melissa said. I was hoping we could just spend Thanksgiving cooking and relaxing together. I really enjoy doing that. Christmas or maybe next year, if we're not married, Travis said, then realizing what he had just said, he tried to correct himself. I mean, unless either of us is married to someone else. It's not like we're married to each other. Melissa simply smiled. She decided to let him go in peace this time, to see what he wanted to do. Okay, Travis, what do you mean? She asked. Travis explained the whole dinner situation to Betty's parents and who he thought would be there. In her heart of hearts, Melissa was sure that even though Travis had been told Betty wouldn't be there, she would be okay. I'll go, she smiled, but remember 2 things. First, I'm only doing this for you. And second, you owe me. Travis nodded and smiled. Are we done with the serious talk of the day? Melissa asked. Travis nodded vigorously. He had never won an argument with Betty in his life, and he could see that he would probably never win with Melissa. He considered it a victory that she allowed him to gain a few points in this conversation. Did he actually win anything? Then I can relax again, she said. Melissa took off her robe and placed her long legs on Travis' lap. Then she took the remote control and turned on the TV. I'm guessing we will watch your show, Top Gear, first, right? She asked. She mentioned Travis' favorite TV show. She was really happy with how things turned out. Perhaps now he would stop trying to move out of her apartment, at least until they were ready to move to a bigger place together. He also used the word "we" a few times, which was a big win. Travis, honey, would you like a beer? She asked. When he nodded, she lifted her legs from his lap and walked into the kitchen. She brought Travis a cold Dos Equis amber beer and a Pepsi for herself. Then she settled down on the couch next to him. This time she sat even closer to him. She rested her hips and buttocks on him, as if she were almost sitting on his lap, and wrapped one of his arms around her shoulders. As they watched the show's 3 senior English hosts go through their crazy antics testing out all the incredible cars they reviewed on the show, Melissa whispered in Travis' ear and nailed him. Travis, about Thanksgiving dinner next year, what if we were married to each other? Betty took one last look at her outfit before heading to her mother. She chose her outfit with a hint of whimsy but also with very serious intentions. Her dress was deep red with a wide white belt. The belt emphasized her waist and gave her figure a much-needed accent. It really didn't matter what she wore, Travis loved her anyway. But she wanted to wear something that would show him what he hadn't used in the past few weeks. As a finishing touch, she placed a Santa hat on her head at a nicely angle. She even took out some early mistletoe to hang above his head and entice him into a kiss. With any luck, she'd bring her husband home with her tonight, and hopefully forever. Then they could call off the divorce and have a serious conversation about what's wrong with Travis. She could also find out if she did something to trigger it. Her sister suggested that perhaps it was one of those moments that men go through when they reach a certain age. Some of them dyed their hair, some of them bought a sports car, and others decided to climb a mountain or run a marathon. She hoped that was all it was. Either way, she should have spent more time trying to make Travis happy and make their marriage work. Perhaps she should have spent less time planning her fleet-leading dates and more time diversifying her nightlife with Travis. She hadn't been with anyone since Gary, and she was so eager that she would probably have a night with Travis in her parents' bedroom if they left her unattended. As excited as she was, it had to be Travis. She missed him dearly, more than she could express in words. She was sure that he didn't really want a divorce either. He did not withdraw money from the accounts or file for divorce. His leaving hurt her a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, they would still be together forever, so it didn't hurt them. In fact, it might even strengthen their relationship. If Travis missed her half as much as she missed him, they would probably never be apart again. She could think of only one condition under which she could forgive him. He should either fire that Melissa or make her apologize to Betty. Betty was sure Melissa would rather quit than apologize to her, so it would be the same thing. This little was too interested in Travis for Betty's liking. This went on for too long. It was time to stop this. Betty got into her car and drove to her mother's house. When she got to the door, her brother-in-law Kevin opened it. Betty still couldn't figure out why the hell her sister married Kevin. He was plump and awkward. He also hadn't worked for more than 4 years. He spent all his time either playing video games or reading comics. Strangely, he turned down a job at a comic book store. He said something about not wanting to dilute his passion for art by accepting money for it. It didn't make sense at all. He stood in the same store for hours every Wednesday when new comics came out. He argued about the same books and discussed the same characters with the same other nerds. Why didn't he do it and get paid for it? At least if he worked in a store, he would bring home some money for it. "Hey, Betty, you look good," Kevin said. "Listen, Kevin," Betty replied sharply, "Travis will be here today too. Please don't drive him away by talking about Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Can we have at least one holiday like normal people? You can talk about football or something that normal guys like instead of Sauron and the world or all this nonsense." Kevin almost slammed the door in Betty's face. She rushed in and walked past him. He said under his breath, "No wonder Travis left you." Debbie came into the room and hugged Betty. "I thought you weren't coming," Debbie said. "Mom told everyone you weren't coming to force Travis to come." Betty smiled. "Damn, at least you could have told me," Debbie complained. "Why would you tell everyone?" Betty asked. "Sooner or later, you would have told someone who knew Travis. They would have told him, and Travis would have come." "But I look like a cow," Debbie said. "Travis is so cute. If I knew he was coming, I could have dressed up like you." "Debbie, Travis is my husband. I dressed up because we're having problems, and I need him back. It's like when Conan Barbarian was there and left you and came back to live in his mom's basement a few years ago," Betty said. Debbie simply smiled. "Yes, but my darling is back with me now, and everything is better than ever." "How?" Betty asked. "You started putting pressure on him because you were working 2 jobs at the hospital to pay the mortgage. He was sitting at home on his fat 5th place, eating bonbons and reading comics. He didn't even clean the house. Plus, you paid for all of his damn comic books. You wanted him to get a job to take some of the pressure off of you. Remember, you needed extra income because you were thinking about the baby." "But, Betty, that was before I understood how things really worked," Debbie said. "Oh God, I need to hear this," Betty said. "Is it working now?" "Well, no," said Debbie, "but I had to look at our relationship in real terms. Kevin doesn't hit me. He doesn't go out and cheat on me with other women. The fact that he's home all the time means I don't have to worry about anyone breaking into our house. And I don't need a baby because I already have Kevin, and he's a big kid at heart." "Tell her, honey," Kevin said from some corner of the house. "You two are perfect for each other." Betty chuckled. Betty went into her mother's kitchen. Her mother turned and smiled as Betty entered the room. "Hi, Betty," she said. "I'm glad you're here. I need you for—" "Sorry, Mom, better ask Debbie to do it. I can't afford to get this dress dirty. I need to look good when Travis comes." Her mom just looked at Betty and bit her lip. Betty returned to the living room just in time to see her son arrive. To say she was shocked was an understatement. Her son had changed in the last 10 weeks that he had been at school. He had gained several kilograms, well, more than a few, actually. He was starting to look a little like Kevin, except he had tattoos. Her clean-shaven, conservative son now had a shaved head, a full beard, and tattoos on every inch of exposed skin on his arms. For a big guy, his hands were disproportionately small. It looked like a beach ball with tubes for arms. He even had a tattoo on his neck. Why the hell would anyone get a neck tattoo? Betty needed to replace her wine with something stronger. When Travis comes, she's sure he'll go nuts thinking about all the money they spend sending their son to college, so he starts looking like he should be in the circus. Good luck finding a job looking like that, she thought. And now the girl he brought with him. She looked sickly thin, without breasts or in fifth place. She was dressed entirely in black. Her dress was so long that it dragged on the ground. At least she only had one tattoo. Unfortunately, it was an inverted pentagram right in the center of her forehead. The girl looked as if she had never seen the sun. When she first came in, she was wearing a veil made of black lace, which she took off as she entered. Betty decided that, no matter how strange her son looked, he was lucky to have a girl. Perhaps she shouldn't judge a book by its cover. This girl could become the future mother of her grandchildren. Betty walked over and introduced herself. The girl smiled at Betty, and then things went from bad to worse. When the girl smiled, Betty noticed she had fangs. Honey, asked Betty, what's going on with your teeth? Betty thought they were Halloween-type vampire fangs. My dentist did it for me, the girl said in the deepest voice Betty had ever heard. Betty wasn't even sure if the girl was actually human. I will keep them until I grow real fangs, the girl continued. Betty didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She would be very happy when Travis arrived. Hey, Dad, Betty said across the room to her father, who was watching the football game. Her father raised his glass, and Betty wondered what he was drinking. Whatever it was, she needed some of it. Where's Travis? Asked her father. We're taking a little break, Dad, Betty said. What did you do with him? Asked her father. At that moment, Debbie, who was talking to Betty's son Steve and his girlfriend Anastasia, screamed, You did what? She screamed. Debbie walked away from the couple and returned to the kitchen. Betty walked up to her son and his girlfriend. She was glad to be away from her father. She couldn't believe that her own father thought it was her fault that Travis abandoned her. Stephen, what did you tell your aunt? Asked Betty. Oh, Mom, I just told her how we both had our useless reproductive organs modified, Steve said. Betty splashed wine on her son's face and Anastasia's dress. She had trouble breathing and began to choke. The wine went down the wrong pipe. When she regained her breath, she repeated her sister's question just as loudly. What did you do? She screamed. It's not a big deal, Steve said. It was just a short snip. I had a vasectomy, and Anna had her tubes tied. It didn't matter anyway because she couldn't have children. I could have an intim with her every day. Vampires can't have children, you know. Betty heard her father's laughter coming from across the room. She just stood there and wondered what the hell had happened to her son. Is this reversible? She asked. Steve just shrugged. Betty walked across the room and sat down next to her father. What are you drinking, Dad? She asked. Jack Daniels, he said, tipping his glass in her direction. So now my only hope for great-grandchildren depends on your daughter, he said. They listened as Kevin argued with Anastasia about who had more supernatural powers, Anastasia because she was a vampire or Kevin, who now claimed to be a level 3 warlock of the Dark Tower. Anastasia told him that she had more time to develop her abilities since she turned 500 years old. Betty and her father looked at each other, and he took a long sip of alcohol from his glass. You'd think that in 500 years, she'd grow at least some breasts, her father said. I'm just saying. At that moment, the doorbell rang. It's great Thanksgiving, Kevin said, standing up to answer the door. We have the warlock, the vampire, the tattooed guy, Betty, the... Kevin stopped talking mid-sentence. Travis who? What? Betty snapped. She settled herself on the armrest of her father's chair, trying to look as nicely as possible. He, brought his, Kevin said. Your own what, idiot? Betty asked. His own goddess, Kevin said dreamily. Travis walked into the room, followed by Melissa, who held his hand tightly. At this point, everything seemed to slow down. Betty saw that Travis had brought Melissa with him and nearly fell off the arm of her chair in surprise. Her father, who hardly ever left his chair, caught Melissa's eye, stood up, and walked to the door. Steve saw her and started trying to hide the tattoos on his arms. Debbie came down the stairs to see Travis and froze in her tracks when she saw Melissa. Anastasia bared her fangs at Melissa and hissed. Finally, Betty's mother came out of the kitchen to see why the house had suddenly become so quiet. "Hi, Travis," Betty's mom said. "It's time for you to come in here, and who is?" "Hey, Mom, this is Melissa," Travis said, as if that explained everything. Melissa stepped forward and gave Betty's mom the bottle of wine she and Travis had taken and took the box from Travis. "It's a holiday angel cake," Melissa said. "Did you make this with your food?" Kevin asked with delight. "Can I help you in the kitchen?" Melissa asked. Betty's mom smiled widely. "Of course you can," she said, taking Melissa's hand and leading her to the kitchen. "Why the hell did you bring her?" Debbie hissed. "Your mom said I could bring someone," Travis said, and shrugged. "She's somebody." "Come on over here, Travis, let's watch football," Betty's father said. "God, she's so hot." 20 minutes later, the living room was silent except for the sound of the television. Travis and his soon-to-be ex-father-in-law were having a great time watching Michigan State lose to Iowa. Across the room, Stephen, Kevin, Betty, Debbie, and Anastasia were all looking into the kitchen at Melissa. "She's beautiful," said Stephen. "She's unreal," Kevin said, which earned him a kick in the shin from his wife. "She's a," Debbie said. "I hate her to the core," Betty said. "I would sleep with her," Anastasia said. 20 minutes later, Melissa left the kitchen and walked into the living room. It was a miracle that she was able to avoid slipping on the puddles of Kevin and Steve's spit on the floor in her high heels. She settled herself on the arm of Travis's chair, just as Betty had done on the arm of her father's chair an hour ago. She leaned over Travis, and her head rested on his shoulder. Betty started to cross the room towards her, but Debbie stopped her. "I know you're angry, sister," Debbie said, "but don't ruin Mom and Dad's Thanksgiving. Wait until after dinner, then I'll distract her by asking about her clothes or something, and you can talk to Travis." After a while, they all gathered at the dinner table. The table was beautifully set with all kinds of delicious dishes. The golden turkey glittered in the center of the table, there was a ham on the side, a large pot of mashed potatoes, and a gravy boat stood right in front of Kevin. Betty's father stood up to say a prayer of thanksgiving but was interrupted. "Hey, Anastasia, you can't eat this food, remember? You have to be a damn vampire," Kevin said. "Kevin, honey, shut up," Debbie said across the table. Anastasia looked irritated, and then it began. Betty noticed Melissa and Travis holding hands. She couldn't stand it anymore. She grabbed the gravy boat and threw it at Melissa, who somehow dodged all that brown liquid. Quickly, she grabbed a biscuit and threw it across the table as hard as she could. The biscuit hit Betty right between the eyes, and the butter on top smeared Betty's makeup, and she screamed. She grabbed a handful of mashed potatoes and threw them at Melissa, who dodged behind Travis. Betty realized she had thrown mashed potatoes on her husband and screamed again. Anastasia took a moment to throw a handful of green beans at Kevin. The beans in the pot they were cooked in were still very hot when they hit Kevin in the face. The big, clumsy man was furious. He got up from the table, quickly walked around it, and began to kick Anastasia. Stephen stood up and tried to pull his uncle away from his girlfriend, and the two men ended up wrestling on the floor, accidentally rolling over the supposed vampire who was underneath them. By this time, Betty and Melissa also stood up and began to walk around the table towards each other. Debbie again tried to hold back her sister, who started all this. Betty was so furious with Melissa that she hit her own sister in an attempt to free herself. Melissa had decided by then that she was tired of being the object of Betty's attention. She grabbed the bowl of cranberry sauce and threw the whole thing at Betty. The bowl did not reach the target and fell to the floor, far from its target, but the sauce covered Betty, ruining her outfit, hair, and face. Betty also slipped on the slippery mess and fell on her butt. There was chaos throughout the room. Only Travis and Betty's parents did not participate. Betty's father walked over to the china cabinet, opened the first drawer, and took something out from the very back corner. His hand appeared with a gun, which he shot once at the ceiling to get everyone's attention. "Damn it, stop it now!" Betty's father shouted. "Look what you've done," he started, pointing at Melissa. "Betty, you threw the sauce at her and started all this," Debbie said. "I was only reacting to what she did," Betty replied sharply. "She held my husband's hand right in front of our eyes." "You mean ex-husband," Melissa said. "You filed for divorce from him. That makes him a free man." Everyone around the table gasped in shock. "Is this true, Mom?" Stephen asked. Betty nodded without looking up. "I don't want a divorce," she screamed, her voice on the verge of breaking. "I only did it because your father left. I needed to get his attention so we could talk. The divorce should never have happened." "There was always going to be a divorce," Travis said. "You just filed for it before I was ready." "But why did you cheat on me, dear?" Betty asked. "I love you." "Yes," Travis said. "You love me enough to cheat on me for months." "I know it wasn't Gary's first time, Betty. You broke my heart. You should have known that if I found out about your cheating, there would be no hope for us." Everyone around the table fell silent. Nothing was said for several moments, and then Betty's father broke the silence. "Betty, he's not telling the truth, is he?" Betty couldn't see her father's eyes. "It was only intim, Dad," she said very quietly. "It didn't mean anything. There was no love there. I just wanted a little variety." Debbie exclaimed, "Betty, you are a worthless fool. As much as I love Kevin's lazy fifth place with all his quirks, I would die to have what you just ruined." "Hey," Kevin said. "Shut up, Kevin," Debbie said. "Travis loved you, Betty. He talked about you like you were something special, and he went out of his way to give you everything you asked for. For years, you bragged about how good he was in bed. You lied." "No," said, "he's just been so tired from work lately that we've cut it down to 3 or 4 times a week. I kind of need more. It's not like any of the guys I've dated have been that good. So does he. I just thought that as long as we didn't talk about it, I'd get a little extra money. I'll take it 4 times a week." Melissa said, "How often do you guys do this now?" Debbie asked. "We're not like that," Melissa said. "More, but," Betty said. "I thought so, Betty. You're not wrong. I've loved Travis for many years, but we didn't do anything intimate at all." Melissa began. "Still," said Travis, who had not said much until now. "Travis loved you with all his heart," Melissa said. "I knew it would take him a long time to forget you, but you hurt him so much that he now has trust issues. I think deep down, he just wanted to somehow get back to you and still maintain the relationship. His pride. I think he never imagined he could be happy with anyone else." "How many times have you cheated on him?" Betty asked her father. Everyone at the table looked at her. "I don't remember," Betty said. "Try really hard," her mother said. "Give us the damn number." "Betty, you went to college. It shouldn't be that hard." "Mom, was it more than 5? Betty asked, silently. "More than 10? Debbie asked in shock. Betty nodded again. Kevin took the opportunity to cough, but instead of just coughing normally, he coughed out, "Was it more than?" Her father began. "Please stop asking," Travis said. He stood up, and everyone around the table could see the tears running down his cheeks. Betty wanted to approach him, but he raised his hand, warning her to stay away from him. "Mom and Dad," Travis began, "I'm really sorry. I've always called you that because, ever since I met you, you've become a second parent to me. Thank you for inviting me into your home, again for the way things turned out, and for ruining my vacation." Everyone could tell that Travis was barely holding it together. "Stephen, I haven't had a chance to discuss your new look with you yet, but son, we need to talk." Steve looked at his father and nodded. Kevin chose that moment to laugh. "Damn it, you guys picked the worst women," Kevin said. "Travis married A and Steve is stuck with a fake dead girl with no 5th place or chest." Betty's father took this opportunity to point the gun at Kevin. "I'm a loser here, too," and he said, "I'm losing the wrong son-in-law." The one I want to keep in the family will probably divorce my daughter. If I want to get a divorce, my second daughter probably won't. If you keep talking, I might just put us both out of our misery by drilling another hole in your fifth place." Kevin looked around and began putting food on his plate. "It might as well not go to waste," he said. Anastasia looked at Kevin, laughing. Travis turned to Melissa and extended his hand. "It's time for us to go home, Mel," he said. Over the next week, Betty called Travis repeatedly, but to no avail. Travis never answered the call and finally blocked her calls. They met at her lawyer's office to discuss the division of property, and Betty tried in every possible way to delay the process. She insisted on undergoing counseling. I missed meetings. She made absurd demands. She wanted a 90-10 split of all their assets in her favor. She wanted 98% of Travis's income in child support. She knew that no court would satisfy her demands, but the refusal to deviate from them further delayed the divorce process. Travis and Melissa were happy. Travis saw his goal in freeing himself from Betty. He continued to work in this direction and knew that he would eventually achieve it. Betty could only drag out the divorce. She couldn't prevent it. Melissa, on the other hand, was delighted. All she ever wanted was Travis, and now she had him. Her only concern was making him happy. One morning, just after New Year's, the police arrived at their office. They needed Travis to come with them. They didn't say why. Melissa insisted on going with them. They took Travis to the morgue. There, in a separate office, he was told that Betty had been killed. She was strangled in a cheap motel on New Year's Eve. It was suspected that she met her killer on the internet. There have been a series of murders of women who met men on Craigslist. A few days later, the family gathered to say goodbye to Betty. Despite how their marriage and relationship ended, Travis couldn't help but cry. Melissa was always there to help him hold it together as the family gathered to watch the cremation. No one spoke until Anastasia broke the silence. "What a waste," she said. Yes, Kevin agreed. She would still be alive if she could have kept her legs together. "No," Anastasia said sharply. "I mean, if you had called me sooner, I could have saved her. I could have turned her so she would have been a vampire like me, but she would still have been with us." Everyone present, including the crematorium employee, looked at Anastasia as if she were crazy. "Hey, Anna," Kevin snapped, "it's daytime and the sun is shining outside. I thought you vampires couldn't stand the sun." "I'm not fully a vampire yet," Anastasia snapped. In the months following Betty's death, many changes occurred in her family. Travis quickly realized that there was no point in grieving for Betty endlessly. He moved on with his life, returned to his home, and moved in with Melissa. They married less than 6 months after that. The following Thanksgiving, they all got together again, this time for dinner at Travis and Melissa's home. Betty and Debbie's parents had to travel far. They sold their house, bought a motorhome, and traveled around the country enjoying life. Debbie arrived alone and looked fine. Melissa gave her makeup and style tips, and the two women became friends. Debbie divorced Kevin shortly after Betty's death when she caught him cheating. Stephen was there with his new girlfriend, a very beautiful and very conservative black girl. He wore a long-sleeved shirt and a turtleneck. He had laser removal of his tattoos. Kevin came too. Kevin and his nephew looked at each other angrily all evening. Travis had to have a serious talk with them at the beginning of the evening to make sure there would be no fights between them. Kevin and his nephew now hated each other. There had been a lot of fights between them over the past year. Most of the arguments centered around Kevin marrying Anastasia, who still thought she was a vampire. "What do you think of our story today?" "In my opinion, sleeping with your boss and then telling your husband how much you love him is a complete nonsense. I only feel sorry for the husband. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the comments.